Happy Lamster, daughter of Albion.
Happy Lamster.
So, is there a history of pilgrimage in England?
Well, very much so. I mean, I must say you're probably far more of an expert than I am on the Christian front. But so far as by the literary canon, then yes, of course, our great one of our great formative English texts being the Canterbury Tales naturally begins in the pub. But immediately they're referred to as the Pilgrims, and you'll find this in all of our beautiful formative ecclesiastical texts, where they just about move away from being pure scripture and they start to take the form more of a story, and that story breaks away from the scriptural tradition and it begins to be one of a pilgrimage, and so very much a story of adventure and adversity, still usually Christian in nature at this point. But yeah, one of the first of the, or well, not the first, but one of the, I suppose one of the canonical earliest would be The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. So
Yes,
yeah.
which
Mhm.
which I am a massive fan of Pilgrim's Progress, and
Oh, good.
I gather it used to be. It's pretty much almost a set reading text for people who were going to be preachers. Everybody would read Pilgrim's
Nice.
Progress. I think that's stopped being the case, sadly.
I
But
did wonder actually.
it's absolutely wonderful. So I'm hoping that we can do some readings from it during this stream. I was just talking on the previous stream to Panama Hat, and we were doing our
Hmm.
best Chesterton impressions.
I
But it,
really enjoyed that. I was listening in and I had a giggle, but I didn't, I had forgotten how beautiful Chesterton was actually. But yeah, marvelous.
I don't know that anybody knows what John Bunyan would have sounded like, though. So I guess we have the creative liberty then.
Well, it's tricky. I mean, something tells me, unfortunately, with this period of time, it's always a little disappointing. It's a bit like when people come to realize that Shakespeare probably sounded a bit geezer, you know?
Yes.
It's hard to know, but he may well have sounded quite like a commoner. Not there's anything wrong with that, of course.
No, no. Well, yes, that's funny. It's Shakespeare because we associate it these days with being
Mm,
very high class. Shakespearean actors have the most received
right.
pronunciation. But no, as I understand it, yeah, I had come to the same. There's occasionally Shakespeare plays that get put on in the best reconstruction of the dialect of the time, and it does sound quite farmer like.
Mm. Yes. Well, he was obviously one of the king's men, which at the time was he was like a comedian almost, you know, one of the lads almost. He was a poor man. I think he was writing with he used to write with the bones of or feathers that he found on the ground or the bones of animals and whatever. So well, he wasn't necessarily a uppity largy da in the way you might think now. But I have to remind myself of that. So I do wonder about Bunyan. I don't know. I don't know. Quite funny
Yes.
though.
Before we dig into
Mm.
Bunyan, I wonder if we could talk about is there a particular site of pilgrimage that you'd like to discuss that's currently around in the UK?
Well, when we first chatted, we talked a little about our shared love of the Pilgrim's Progress, and it did prompt me to think about pilgrimage now. It's one of those customs of Christianity, I suppose we all know about, and almost feels deeply archaic and somehow redundant. And it got me to thinking, well, why is it then? I don't know about others. I can't speak on their behalf, but when I hear the word pilgrimage, to my shame, I tend to think of the Hajj or the pilgrimage to Mecca.
Right.
And I appreciate that it's not a hard and fast binding law in Christianity in the way it maybe is one of the pillars of Islam. But yes, we do have a number, I believe, of pilgrimages in the UK. But the one I'm familiar with is the island of Lindisfarne, which is also known as Holy Island. And it's a tidal island and it's just off Northumberland. Have you been, Lambda? Or?
No, I've never been.
Mm.
I'd be very interested to. It sounds great.
It's beautiful. It is very beautiful. Yeah, so so far as I understand, one of the earliest centers of English Christianity. So there's the remains of a monastery there. It's founded by Saint Aidan, who relevant to the conversation today, he was someone who was known for always refusing to go anywhere on horse or using a cart, but always insisted on walking on foot because the pilgrimage was very much part of the landscape of the time. And then later, of course, it became the monastery of, attended by the later Saint Cuthbert's, who is, I believe, the patron saint of Northumberland. So yeah, and it's what's interesting is that there is a proper Easter pilgrimage there every year. There's an official one. I think it's called the Northern Cross, and so pilgrims will take turns carrying the cross from the morning on Good Friday, and they'll arrive for the Easter liturgy on the Sunday. But they walk from, I think it's around Berwick upon Tweed. Well, there are different routes, but it's across the sand dunes essentially. And there are all sorts of old traditions. You're not meant to wear shoes. You walk on the bare feet on the sand, and it's a beautiful landscape. It's very cold, but yeah, it's lovely. I really think it's beautiful.
Yes, the only time I think I'd heard of Linda's Farm, because I wasn't before you brought this to my attention, I wasn't aware that there was pilgrimage, so perhaps to my shame. But I only
No.
knew it because wasn't there a famous Viking attack on Linda's Farm at some point?
Yes, that's right. When you go over there, it's mentioned regularly, but
Aha.
yeah, a very vicious one, I believe. More than one, I think,
They
because
weren't.
they're right out on the
They
pinnacle
didn't come
there.
over on pilgrimage, I assume.
Not that I'm aware of. Wouldn't have thought so. Another kind of a pillage, not a pilgrimage, perhaps.
It's so easy to get those two confused.
Isn't it? Isn't it? But it's a lovely place, and I mean, if people are interested in going, yeah, you can take the route, and just be careful. The main thing to keep in mind is the tidal times, because obviously you don't want to cross when the tide's coming in. And yeah, it's essentially it's the place, mostly if you're interested in, I'd say, St. Cuthbert. And I think we were talking before the story of the otters who were said to have warmed his feet with their fur when he would go in to pray. It was very charming.
Yeah. There's something about the fact that so much of our life is lived in either online, virtually, or just intellectually in our heads. I think it's important to remember we're embodied beings, right? We have to
Hmm.
move through space. If you're a pilgrim, you're physically starting somewhere and ending somewhere else, and the place that you finish has this sort of reverence and significance. I just wonder if that's one of the reasons it feels archaic, because we have this kind of pompous notion that we've transcended the need for physical action and event. But I don't think that's true at all.
Oh, well, no, I think you could be right. It's one of those easy things to forget, and you know, it. I mean, so the Pilgrim's Progress, I really enjoy it because it adheres to this old 17th century conceit, which was the idea that footfall as knowledge, right? So it's the understanding that because we as peoples are track makers, we literally are footprint makers. Entire regions, both geographically but also spiritually, are defined by the very footfall of those that walk it. And I suppose the language of pilgrimage in this sense, and it's sort of the language of ghosts and ancient ancestors, tales of old, the old trodden paths that are worn by old stories. And I'm very romantic in that sense, but I like that. I quite like that it's a physical act. I mean, I enjoy listening to people discuss theology, but there is something about the pilgrimage as a lived practice that is active that I also have I've kind of missed really. I'm trying to prompt myself to reconnect with that. The belief maybe that something spiritual can be accomplished on foot, and that there's something spiritually meaningful about being in transit among
Yes.
the sort of highways and byways, those tracks that are worn by ancient paths. And yeah, that traveling as a physical act, I guess, is a kind of mode in itself of divine connection or delivery, spiritual nourishment. And yeah, I don't know about you, Lambda, but yeah, I definitely feel that that's something I've forgotten or isn't necessarily. It's a custom that's sort of neglected sometimes, possibly.
Yeah, and I think as we dig into Pilgrim's Progress, we
Mm.
will probably discover the value of pilgrimage in that. you can you can go on a pilgrimage, go physically somewhere, which isn't something that I've done, but this preparing for this stream has made me think. I should set my mind to it. But the Pilgrim's Progress conceit. Well, why don't you explain? Because it's more than straightforwardly a recounting of somebody doing a physical pilgrimage, isn't it?
Mm. Well, yeah, it's. I mean, it's really among our nation's. It's one of the first texts that makes the leap, kind of from scripture to story. So it's in its simplest form. The simple premise is it's a Christian allegory. So it basically it articulates matters of biblical and theological import in literary form. So in this case, yes, it's a pilgrimage, but the very landscape of the pilgrimage, it ties in with the allegory would be that, I guess, of Christian suffering, Christian hardship, the trials and tribulations along the way of the path to, not enlightenment, but to salvation. And so the very physical landscape that is mapped out in the story, it kind of reminds me of Edward Thomas famously said, "Much has been written of travel, far less of the road," and that's kind of what the sentiment is here. The road, it's sort of mapped out in the story. It kind of reminds me, actually, this is why I referred to Mordor earlier. It kind of reminds me of like the original Middle Earth map, or Narnia. These are physical places you can think of that have been mapped out by which where the protagonist is navigating his way through. So where mountains and lakes become symbols of obstacle and endurance, and there are physical locations that he has to navigate, which we'll come to talk about. I'm sure you'll agree that one of the is it the Mire of the Slough or
the Slough of Despond?
That's right. That's got to be the favorite. Isn't that juicy? I love that.
Yeah, in a way, calling it an allegory might not make apparent how it's in your face. I find it adorable that none of the characters have names. The names of all the characters is just straightforwardly what they represent in the story.
Vices and virtues, and
every place that they come to on this journey. So there's this guy who's on the journey doing the pilgrimage, and of course his name is Pilgrim. He arrives at he in the allegory, he comes to a slough. His slowing of movement towards his eventual goal is allegorically despondency. So the name of the slough is the Slough of Despond, and it's like that the whole way through.
And there's also the Hill of Despair and the River of Death, and very literal. But I like it.
I think we should have some readings of bits of it to give a feel for it.
All right, let's do that.
Should we alternate?
Yeah. Have you got the? Hang on.
I've got the Slough of Despond actually here. So shall I start with that?
I'll just flip my book open to. Yeah, please do. Slough of Despond. I do love it. Go for it.
Now I saw in my dream that just as they had ended this talk, they drew near to a very miry slough that was in the midst of the plain, and they, being heedless, did both suddenly fall into the bog. The name of the slough was Despond. Here therefore they wallowed for a time, being grievously bedaubed with the dirt, and Christian, because of the burden that was on his back, began to sink into the mire. Then said Pliable, "Ah, neighbour Christian, where are you now?" "Truly," said Christian, "I do not know." At this, Pliable began to be offended, and angrily said to this fellow, "Is this the happiness you have told me all this while of? If we have such ill speed at our first setting out, what may we expect betwixt this and our journey's end? May I get out again with my life? You shall possess this brave country alone for me." And with that he gave a desperate struggle or two, and got out of the mire on that side of the slough which was next to his own house. So away he went, and Christian saw him no more. So that I think gives a good flavour of the writing style.
Poor guy's got a house next to the slough,
But I love the precision with which he indicates
Mm.
he got out of the slough on the side which was nearest to his own house. And then in the next thing it says Christian endeavours to struggle to that side of the slough which was still further from his own house and next to the wicket gate.
I do love that, but then I wonder. I'm sure part of that also is, I guess, people not being to read or write in what is this 17th century. So
Yes.
maybe just like a, I don't know, the kind of artistic envisioning of. But it does sound. It sounds silly to us, I suppose, retrospectively. It sounds clumsy in many ways, doesn't it? Yeah,
I find it adorable, if I'm
I
honest.
think it's
I
charming,
think
isn't it?
it's charming to me
Yeah.
that it's written with such sort of wide-eyed sincerity.
Yeah, it's childlike almost, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also childlike to give the names of these characters with such little subtlety that it goes beyond naivety to almost baby like.
Well, I do love that being grievously bedaubed with the dirt. I mean, I do. I'm gonna have to pick that one up for the. I feel like miry slough is something that academic agent would call, like the drain the swamp types. I'm trying
Yes,
to pick that
yes.
up. The miry slough.
So the pilgrim, what he's setting out on this journey, but like what's the in-world conceit here? How does it kick off?
Well, actually, interestingly, it more or less starts with a dream. So, there's some brief apologia at the start and whatnot, but the story plays out in a dream. That's more or less where it starts. And so the author Bunyan, he tells us that he's fallen into a deep slumber and he begins to dream of a man. And so it's this man that's going to be the protagonist of the journey that follows. What's interesting, the man. No, it's interesting because the man is evidently sick. He's writhing and convulsing with some sort of mental torment that's not clear to begin with. Um, and that's how we first meet him, and we learn that his name is Christian. Interestingly enough, and despite being a married father, he is plagued by what we essentially come to infer is Christian suffering. So he's in pain, he's in anguish. I don't know if you've ever read Crime and Punishment, but it reminded me, forgive me, I forget the name now of the protagonist, but it reminded me how after he's committed the crime, he exists in this state of just kind of giddy nervousness. He's sort of drenched in sweat and he's stricken by this half dread, half terror. So that's how the pilgrim begins. And ultimately, yeah, this is representing Christian suffering. And the heavy burden that he's carrying, which is, I guess, I forget what he says exactly, but he's concerned about being able to get into. Well, he's concerned about the forthcoming day of judgment? Is that right? And finding his way to the divine gates. And at one point, he says something like, "What is it? I find that I'm not willing to do the first and unable to do the latter." And he's referring basically, on the one hand, die, and on the second, be judged. I always thought that was quite funny. But
Yes.
that's how it begins. Yeah, it's a dream, but we start with a man who's kind of terrified of, and he's in a bit of a existential mess. But there are
Yeah.
some comedic moments. I don't know if they're deliberate, but
That's also a mystery to me. I was trying to figure out because it's comes across as hilarious in a sense,
mm,
but unlike Chesterton that I was talking about an hour
yeah,
ago, I
yeah.
don't think Bunyan meant it that way. I think
Mm.
if you were to meet Bunyan, I suspect I'd have the same reaction that I'd be hiding my smile constantly.
I agree.
Sort of childlike earnestness with which he behaved. I don't know, but yes, I'm not. I'm not willing to do the first, nor able to do the second. And at least the version I've got here has
Mm.
actual Bible references
Ah,
next to
yes.
it.
I
And
can see them.
do you know if is that part of the original text? I
No, I
think it
think
may
that's
have
been added
been.
retrospectively, I'd imagine. Yeah. I don't
Okay,
know that for
interesting.
sure, though, if I'm honest, but it's been through so many revisions.
I see. Yes. Now, am I right in saying Bunyan wrote this from prison?
Yes, from Bedford Jail. Most of it was written, yeah. Where he spent quite a bit of time. I mean, he wrote prolifically anyway, so he's constantly writing. I don't know where he fit the time in, but yes, I believe this one was from prison.
Well, I mean, if you're in prison for
You
10
got
years, then you're
time. Good point.
nothing else to do. So maybe they should
Mm.
have locked him up for longer. But
Without a pen and paper, yeah.
not to move on from Pilgrim's Progress, but he actually wrote a sequel.
Right, exactly. What was that? Is it Pilgrims? Is it just the Pilgrim's Progress, the second part or so?
Yeah, I think it's called Pilgrim's Progress 2.
Two.
They didn't feel the need to give it a subtitle. It's
And is
about. Go on.
sorry, go on, please. Yeah.
I was going to say, isn't it about his wife and children who
Yes.
follow on after him?
Yes, that's right. Because at the beginning of the story, although he is married and he's got the children, he essentially leaves them for which I was sort of perplexed by, but he sort of can't cope with the burden of what's going on for him, and so he spirits away into the landscape to do his pilgrimage. But yes, he does start with the wife and the children there. So I'd be interested. I've never read that second one though. I would be interested to follow up on that. Yeah,
Yeah, I think I years and years ago I did read the second one, and it's also very good
interesting.
if I remember. And
Ah,
one of the fun things about that is that as the wife and children are traveling through the landscape,
mm,
they keep seeing evidence of Christian's journey. There's kind of
mm. Oh, I
you,
like
you
that.
kind of revisit the same location and see what's happened in the intervening time.
Oh, that's quite interesting. That's quite an interesting literary technique, actually. Little kind of
Yeah,
signposts and signals. You mean? Hmm.
yeah, and I can't remember if that's also used allegorically in a sense of,
Yeah.
oh well, we can make it through this because we saw somebody else made it through despondency, for
Mm,
example. That although Christians struggled in the slough of despond for 3 days,
mm.
yet he left us a path through this kind of thing.
It's almost as though, yeah, the even like the kind of road already traveled type
Yes,
sentiment. Hmm. Yeah,
I
I'd
I,
be
I, wo-
interested to read it now. Hmm.
I wonder if there's another passage that you would like to read from Pilgrim's Progress.
Honestly, you took my favorite, but
Oh, I'm sorry. You should have
no, I'm
insisted.
even kidding. Well, I don't know. Did you want to give? Should we maybe read that first part? Should I read that just to give people an
Just the
idea?
intro. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Okay, so it says in the similitude of a dream. So that's just the author saying, that basically, I'm having a slumber and I began to dream. So he says, as I walked through the wilderness of this world, I lighted on a certain place where was a den, and I laid me down in that place to sleep. And as I slept, I dreamed a dream. I dreamed, and behold, I saw a man, clothed with rags, standing in a certain place, with his face from his own house, a book in his hand, and a great burden upon his back. I looked and saw him open the book and read therein, and as he read, he wept and trembled, and not being able longer to contain, he brake out with a lamentable cry, saying, what shall I do? In this plight, therefore, he went home and refrained himself as long as he could, that his wife and children should not perceive his distress, but he could not be silent long, because that his trouble increased. Wherefore at length he brake his mind to his wife and children, and thus he began to talk to them. Oh, my dear wife, said he, and you the children of my bowels, I, your dear friend, am in myself undone by reason of a burden that lieth hard upon me. Moreover, I am for certain informed that this our city will be burned with fire from heaven, in which fearful overthrow both myself with thee, my wife, and you, my sweet babes, shall miserably come to ruin, except the which yet I see not some way of escape can be found, whereby we may be delivered. So yeah, then it carries on about his frenzied distemper and whatnot. And I suppose that's the kind of the premise of his yeah, here it is. Sorry. He would also walk solitarily in the fields, sometimes reading and sometimes praying, and thus for some days he spent his time. So he's kind of he's in this kind of quagmire of how can I accomplish salvation, because there is this another funny bit that made me laugh a bit, like we were saying, the kind of primitive, not deliberate humor, but he more or less, when he I think he's at the point of judgment, And what is it he says? He more or less says, "I was just wondering if you will be willing to let me in." I'm paraphrasing that somewhat, but hang on, where is it? I am informed that by this gate is the way thither. Know if you are willing to let me in. I don't know why that really makes me laugh.
Yes.
Would you mind letting me in? Or
There's this funny thing about so the main character Christian
Mm,
is somebody who we are supposed to put ourselves in his shoes, right? Because
mhm,
after all, as Christians reading the text, that is an allegory for our lives, when we feel despondent and that's stopping us progress on our journey, we see Christian stuck in a physical slough of despond and
mm,
struggling to get out,
yes.
and we see the different reactions. So, but there's a sense in which, because the despondency for Christian is a physical obstacle, the actual
Mm,
character of Christian is this perfect, ever striving, ever encouraged person. He's just pressing onwards for this on this physical
mm,
pilgrimage, determined to just like everything that comes in his way, he's miserable about because he's really set on his destination. Although it's characterized that when he's in the
mm,
slough, he also feels despondent, but that it just makes him such a charming protagonist that he's very single-minded and focused, and every character who pops up, you see him have this interaction with. Let's find another. What's another good example of
mm.
somebody he meets along the way?
Well, even when he meets the first pair, is it Obstinacy and
Uh-huh.
what's his face? But you're right. I do
Obstinate and
enjoy that.
pliable. Yeah.
I enjoy that. Just as you say on from that, that he's always in a mess, which I quite like. Because
Yeah.
I guess the point being, it's a reminder that to live is in many ways to bear the suffering. And I think it says at one point, I keep referring to it as a poem. I don't mean to, because that's what Milton is. But I mean the text. It says it refers to the burden, and that we must, be content to bear it. And it's almost, they also say that it also says that mountain has been the death of many and will be the death of many more. It's kind of a reminder of how, yeah, it's a reminder of how difficult the Christian life is, and the pilgrimage is a long way and it's tough. And I like how he's not this sort of well groomed church preacher. He's out there in his rags, barefoot, a total, must look like a right mess, covered in dirt. There's something about that I find quite lovely. Mm.
And in comparison with something like Lord of the Rings, which you mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
you have the
Yeah.
sense that we like an adventure. We like to see characters moving through a world, and I think in a way Bunyan's genius insight is that the reason we like to read these stories, and indeed physically act it out, is
Mm.
actually because more fundamentally we're on a journey emotionally through our lifetimes. So I suspect even for a non-Christian reading this book, they'd get a lot out of it, because there's a deep truth to the sense that
Mm.
we naturally like to think metaphorically in physical terms, and yet the deepest journey we go on is one in our hearts.
Absolutely. In fact, I was going to say something to that effect, but it felt almost too obvious to say life as a journey. It's a very, very woman thing to say, isn't it? Like life as a journey, live, laugh, love type thing. But yes, you're quite right. I mean, this is the process of the active physical journey, and it's not an easy one. It's over mountains and icy summits, and as you see these, I guess the slough is like a kind of a boggy marsh that sucks you in, and it's not a pleasant landscape. It's tough, and the terrain is hard, and it's not full of twittering birds and always sunshine and rainbows. storms and these kind of barren plains, and it's uncomfortable. It's got the sort of speaks to the romantic in me, really. But you're right. It definitely taps into that desire for kind of lived physical experience, I would say.
Should we talk through some of the other locations that Pilgrim
Yes.
that Christian encounters on his way? So he gets through the Slough of Despond. His his home that he's escaping from is called the City of Destruction,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
and then he gets to the Wicket Gate, which is the entry point to the straight and narrow way to the Celestial City.
That's right. Let's see.
So what's the? Do you remember anything about the significance of this way that he's chosen to go on?
I must have. I'm just trying to. I'm looking at the map because some
Somebody
old
did a map.
had a wonderful map. Where are we?
I seem to remember that the Wicket Gate is small and the way is narrow.
It's fairly inoffensive, but it feels significant somehow. Or what? Yeah. What do you think? It's
Yes, and and along the way there's all these kind of turnings off that are wide, and he's like, how am I to identify what the way is? And whoever's telling him is like, it's just the straight. You just follow the way. It's unremarkable, but
yes.
it is direct. And
That's right. I've just found. Yeah, that's right. I did write it down fully enough. The Lord says, "Strive to enter in at the straight gate, for straight is the gate that leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it." But yeah, that's all it is. Straight is the way. Literally, straight on, crack on.
right, yeah, just get on with it.
But
There's not some mystery.
There are all these temptations and things at the side that catch the eye. These kind of vagrants and riddlers who are there talking in his ear, and hither and thither that he could turn.
There's a hill called Hill Difficulty, and the byways on each side there is on one side danger and on the other side destruction.
You know what you're getting. That's the thing. You know what you're getting.
But when he gets to this rest stop that's called House Beautiful, he can kind of relax for a bit. And then now we have to talk about Vanity Fair, which people might have heard of from. I remember Christopher Hitchens used to write for the publication called Vanity Fair that I think took its name from this.
It may be the Thackeray novel as well.
Which perhaps is also named after this, or
yes, I would have thought so because it's later. So
okay, that makes sense. So what kind of thing? What goes on at Vanity Fair? Like, but just by the name, what are we to think in the real life of a Christian is the
the sort of vanities that
allegory
would be another deviation from the straight path to salvation, another byway. Or I think a fair is like geographically, I'm not entirely sure. Is it a sort of bypath, or?
I think it's literally like
Was it
you
an actual
go to the
fair?
fun fair. Like there's all kinds of
trade. That's right. Yeah.
So it's like he's got this objective, like I'm setting off, I'm gonna march to my destination. Oh well, maybe I'll just stop off at this distraction, this fun fair, and it turns out there's lots of other people who are taking the same pilgrimage, and they just get sucked away into these kind of distractions. Yeah,
they're sort of there eternally because isn't it a place full of, I forget, but it's kind of like bawdy smut, and
yes,
I forget exactly, but it's sort of, I guess the implication is either lust or all sorts of bodily temptation, carnal, because there's another place where it's like carnal temptation road or something. It's not literally that, but is that right? Yeah.
So it's a pretty seedy place, but and I think he, in his childlike way, is quite distressed as he's going past it and sees all the people caught up in that lifestyle.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's quite. It reminds me of Dante, really, in his circles of hell, because some of these images actually are quite offensive, or not offensive, but to the imagination. I mean, um, these places
yes,
of like court forever and this seedy kind of funfair of prostitutes and I don't know,
yeah.
drinking.
Here are to
Mm.
be seen too, and that for nothing, thefts, murders, adulteries, false swearers, and that of a blood red colour.
Ooh.
I like he puts false swearers like that's the culmination of the list.
Well, I've just seen it's dwelt in the town of carnal policy.
Amazing.
Oh, brilliant.
He's just unashamed at the way that he names these places.
I love it.
Yeah. So there's a pleasant area that they get to called Plain Ease, and another place of solace is the River of God. Maybe another thing that would be nice to go through is some of the people that he meets along the way.
Yeah, I mean, and supposedly a lot of them are based on people he knew in his lived life. But name-wise, again, they tend to be named after simple virtues or vices or principles.
So one of the residents of Carnal Policy is named Mr. Worldly Wise Man.
Okay.
Perhaps tell you what, why don't we each find another passage to read
Yeah, all right.
that involves an intriguing new character name.
Let's see. One of my favorites.
I'm gonna go for Worldly Wise Man
Go on then.
because
Give us a read.
we've just introduced him. So he says, "Now as Christian was walking solitarily by himself, he espied one afar off, came crossing over the field to meet him, and their hap was to meet just as they were crossing the way of each other. The gentleman's name that met him was Mr. Worldly Wise Man. He dwelt in the town of Carnal Policy, a very great town, and also hard by from whence Christian came. This man then, meeting with Christian, and having some inkling of him, for Christian's setting forth from the city of destruction was much noised abroad, not only in the town where he dwelt, but also it began to be in the town talked of in other places. Mr. Worldly Wise Man, therefore, having some guess of him by beholding his laborious going, and by observing his sighs and groans and the like, began thus to enter into some talk with Christian. 'How now, good fellow? Whither away after this burdened manner?' 'A burdened manner indeed, as ever I think a poor creature had. And whereas you ask me whither away, I tell you, sir, I am going to yonder wicket gate before me, for there, as I am informed, I shall be put into a way to be rid of my heavy burden.' 'Hast thou a wife and children?' 'Yes, but I am so heavy laden with this burden that I cannot take that pleasure in them as formerly. Methinks I am as if I had had none.' 'Wilt thou hearken unto me if I give thee counsel?' 'If it be good, I will, for I stand in need of good counsel.' 'I would advise thee, then, that with all speed thou get thyself rid of thy burden, for thou wilt never be settled in thy mind till then, nor canst thou enjoy the benefits of the blessing which God hath bestowed upon thee till then.' 'This is what I seek, even to be rid of this heavy burden, but get it off myself I cannot. Nor is there any man in our country that can take it off my shoulders. Therefore I am going this way, as I told you, that I may be rid of the burden.' There you go. So as you can see, Worldly Wise Man thinks he knows everything about Christian. And the answer is very obvious.
Well, I like how all of these characters, they have that kind of very hands-on hips. I feel like I've met all of these characters, and it's amazing to me how timeless
Yes.
they are. The world
Yes.
wisely type. And I'm certainly not for a second suggesting I'm sure I've had my moments where I've fallen into that role
Been them
myself, sadly.
yourself.
But
Yeah.
they're so iconic, the archetype of every, even as literal as they are. It's the
Mm.
obstinate man, it's the world wise. In fact, I was just thinking of the atheist man as well, who
Mm.
laughs at him. And I just think, oh my gosh, how timeless is that?
Yes.
Mm.
That's a great passage as well. But it's like the people that we meet are some combination of these characters, where these characters are the distilled ultimate version of each of the traits.
Yeah, they're pure, unadulterated form of like undistilled. Yeah, it's very true. The
Did you
original.
find a passage to read?
It's off the top of my head. It's not the most beautiful passage, but I do remember the one of the atheist just regarding the people he meets. If you want me to
Perfect.
read that one quickly.
Please.
Um, Now after a while they perceived afar off a figure coming softly and alone. I see him, said Hope. Let us take heed to ourselves now, lest he should prove a flatterer also. So the figure drew nearer and nearer, and at last came up to them. His name was Atheist, and he asked them whither they were going. We are going to Mount Zion. The atheist fell into a very great laughter. What is the meaning of your laughter? I laugh to see what ignorant persons you are, to take upon you so a tedious a journey, and you are like to have nothing but for your travel, for your pains. Why, man, do you think we shall not be received? Received? There is no such place as you dream of in all this world. But there is in the world to come. When I was at home in mine own country, I heard as you now affirm, and from the hearing went out to sea, and have been seeking this city this 20 years, but find no more of it than I did the first day I set out. The Christian says, we have both heard and believe that there is such a place to be found. The atheist replies, had not I, when at home, believed? I had not come thus far to seek, but finding none, and yet I should, had there been such a place to be found, for I have gone to seek it further than you. I am going back again, and will seek to refresh myself with the things that I then cast away, for hopes of that which I now see is not. And then said Christian to the hopeful, his fellow, so that's another guy he's picked up on the way, is Hope. Is it true which this man hath said? So it's a fairly innocuous passage, but there's something about that. Oh, the laughter. I've been here before. I'm going back on. I've already done that journey. There's nothing to be found at the end of it. I'm going back to what I cast away. It's
I
that kind of
wonder if
feeling. Go on, sorry.
at the time that it was written, perhaps there were fewer atheists that that were around.
I wonder what the original word used was. Actually, I doubt it was atheist. I don't know though. I'll have to check that. Maybe it was.
That's a good question. Either way, though, it's a relatively small part of his journey, whereas I sense were the Pilgrim's Progress allegory written about somebody, finding their faith today, they would be dealing with atheists for much more of the journey. That would be a kind
Good
of
point.
a primary part of the struggle for them.
That's actually a fascinating point. This is just literally 5 lines. Isn't that extraordinary?
But perhaps there were even people who, at this time, would never have encountered a self-proclaimed atheist in their life.
Yes.
Whereas now it's kind of such a common thing. It was you couldn't avoid running into this perspective.
Interesting. It's a
When I was
really
at
good
uni, it was
point.
everywhere, at least.
Yes, of course. It's atheist society.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a very good point. I'd not thought about that because actually, just thinking about it and looking at the map, I don't think that non-belief or disbelief actually doesn't. I can't remember any place that's sort of called non-believers terrorists or whatever. It does seem to be that brief moment of atheist, the encounter. That's the only real. It's almost as though every other point of distraction or obstacle is something such as ignorance or sin. but not being belief or not having a belief, so it doesn't seem to really play a huge role. That's very interesting.
By the way, chat was highly triggered by the the
I
description of their
you don't.
destination as Mount
By the
Zion.
way, before you even said the word Zion, I thought, should I say that word? Go on, then I will.
Well, so
I knew
I
they would
think that
be. That's
their
hilarious.
reaction probably betrays a certain just lack of
Yes.
wider context. So I don't know if you want to explain,
Oh, no,
but
no. I mean, you're certainly more the biblical expert. My only understanding is that they're just. I mean, guys, this is 1658, so I mean, Mount Zion as a biblical reference is it's not it's not unusual, is it? But
was that yeah? So Zionism is the view that we as modern day Christians ought to set up a Jewish state and get all the Jews there, and that's going to trigger like the end of the world in some positive sense. So it's a very modern movement,
Mhm.
but the reason it's called Zionism is because there's this great symbolic significance to Zion, the mountain of God in the Bible. So I mean, it's physically located in Israel, but it takes on this symbolic sense of like the mountain of God. The fact that John Bunyan is talking about Zion is because there's this sense where going to the mountain of God is equated with like getting to heaven, and
It's like the
is
highest summit, isn't it, of the
yeah,
peak of if you, in kind of metaphorical terms, you could think of it. Yeah.
not Bunyan isn't saying anything to do with modern
Come on,
day
guys.
Israel as a state.
Come on, chat. You
So
gotta know. Yeah. To be honest, when I
yes,
saw it, I hesitated and thought I might just say a different word, but then I thought no, they might be reading along, and then they're gonna. I did think that
no,
would
I think
trigger some.
this is a good learning moment for
But
everybody who's not up on their
it's a very common word to see in this old sort of scripture, isn't it? Though I mean, the mountain of God and the
yeah, you'll see
yeah
it in old hymns, you'll see it in all kinds of places, and I mean it's kind
mm.
of eschatological, meaning it's a
Yes.
term used about the end times, and
Mm.
there's a certain eschatology which is taken up in certain bits of America, which is all related to the, like modern day Jewish people.
Mm.
And so in a weird way, the only time a lot of people hear the word Zion now is connected with that modern political movement.
Yes,
So it's
it
a
is. Yeah.
funny effect that's happened.
Yes, it is really because it's. I mean, you can't read the Bible without reading, the Israel or
No,
Jerusalem, and it tends to be triggering terms. But of course, yes, quite distinct. Funny how that
there you
works.
go. I think there's 32 Bible verses that use the word Zion.
Ah,
Bits in the New Testament, bits in the Old Testament.
right.
Mostly it's Old Testament
I would have
prophets.
thought. Mm.
So yeah, sorry. Back to back to
No
Bunyan.
worries. No worries.
Should we get back to going through the cast list? Shall
Yeah,
I
the
read?
the
I'll
cast.
read some more names and interrupt me if you have
Please. Yeah, please
any
do.
particular recollections or thoughts. So there's the interpreter, the shining ones.
Mm.
Formalist is an interesting
Oh.
guy. And perhaps people could accuse me of being the formalist from time to time. Like,
Oh, go on. Can you
getting
read us a
so.
bit of Formalist then? If that's the, I mean,
Shall I
I'm not,
find
I can't
that?
remember that exact passage. So go on. If
Yeah,
you're
okay.
being accused of it, that would be quite funny.
Well, I don't know if it's a fair accusation. I do get accused of things in
Let's
different
try.
directions from different sides.
Oh, bless you.
So he's met up with these two chaps. The
Mm.
name of the one was Formalist, and the name of the other Hypocrisy. So as I said, they drew up to him, who thus entered with him into this discourse. So this is Christian.
Mm.
Gentlemen, whence came you, and whither go you? And then they say together, we were born into the land of vainglory, and are going for praise to Mount Zion. There it is again, everybody.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Christian says, why came you not in at the gate which standeth at the beginning of the way? Know you not that it is written, that he who cometh not in by the door, but climbeth up by some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. And then formalist I mean, they talk a lot together at this point, so we're not going to be able to distinguish them. So formalist and Hippocrates say that to go to the gate for they say that to go to the gate for the entrance was, and by all their countrymen, counted as too far about, and that therefore their usual way was to make short cut of it and to climb over the wall as they had done.
Oh, cutting corners.
Christian. Yeah, exactly. But will it not be counted as a trespass against the lord of the city, whither we are bound, and thus to violate his revealed will? Formalist and hypothist, they told him that, as for that, he needed not trouble his head thereabout. For what they did, they had a custom for, and could produce, if need were, testimony that would witness it for more than 1,000 years. Now, I think the reason that Bunyan was in prison was because he was a Puritan.
Yes.
So I suspect that some of this writing is actually against. So the formalism. Now I'm reconsidering whether I would be accused of formalism, because I think this might be more like Bunyan attacking Catholicism and High Church Anglicanism. So
Well, it's the right time for this, isn't it?
it's the kind of, don't worry about reforming yourself morally. Just just go along to your local church and abide by their customs, and
That's it.
but in like following the words and such. We've got all of this ancient tradition. So yeah.
Because I mean, one of them is it that he essentially hops over, or he climbs over the wall. Is that right, to salvation rather than the? And then
What ends up happening? Well, is that his plan? But I have a feeling that it didn't work out.
is that formalist? I'm getting confused by the names, but
There's two of them, formalist and hypocrisy, and
that's right.
I think the implication is that they're kind of they're working together. I mean, think about Jesus talking to the Pharisees. He would always accuse them of being hypocrites because they preach all this stuff, make all these rules, tell everybody to follow them, but actually they're internally just as sinful as anybody else. But they're trying to kind of make a
I
different
like how
route.
Christian's just like, well, the hill, though it's high, I covet to ascend, and he sings, like he's kind of singing the words. The
Yeah.
difficulty will not me offend. Can you imagine how annoying that would be, though? Like, oh, he's got to do everything right, you know.
But every time he encounters a character, he's never considered somebody might have this opinion before, and he just asks them straightforward questions like,
Yes.
Isn't what you're doing obviously wrong? And then they respond like, well, no, don't you understand my point of view?
He's like, no, that's not what it says, though, you know.
Yeah.
Cutting corners.
So I think they end up getting lost. Formalist and hypocrisy, they just never make it. They think they've got this smart trick. So then there's watchful, discretion, prudence, piety, and charity. So these are prudence, piety, and charity are these beautiful maidens who I'm wondering now, are they actually in the second part, perhaps? Yes. Okay, so I think Christian encounters discretion, and then when his wife follows, she also encounters some similar beautiful maidens called Prudence, Piety, and Charity, which I think is lovely.
They're very beautiful names, aren't they? And I like that also, that in order to be not it's not that they don't sort of have virtue on their own, but they sort of work in unison, if that makes sense. You can't necessarily have one without the other. They complement each other, is what I mean, I suppose.
And just to underline his lack of Roman Catholicism, there's a character called Pope, and
Oh.
he's a giant. He lives with another character called Pagan, and they live in a cave at the end of the fearsome valley of the
Oh
shadow of death.
no, they don't. At the end of the shadow at the Valley of Death. There's also the
Dear me.
River of Death as well, and of course, I mean, he does meet Beelzebub, doesn't he? And Apollonian. He has
Yes,
a bit of a
Apollon. Apollon.
Apollon. He has a sort of a bit of a sword fight with, or some such. Bit of a
Yes.
scrap. Yeah.
So I think
Open
that
pagan there. That's funny.
I think this is actually a useful, as well as being like an enormous amount of fun to read
Mm.
and kind of charming. I actually think it is valuable. There's been
Mm.
times in my life where I've thought about my life in the terms of
Mm.
as a pilgrimage of this sort. Like I've said,
Mm.
oh, what I'm experiencing now is as if I was on this journey and I'm facing up to I think it's quite helpful
Mm.
to recontextualize. And the other nice thing about a journey is that you're always moving forwards, whereas like real life can feel like you've wasted time and you've not got anywhere and things have not
Mm.
gone your way. But Pilgrim, every page you turn of the Pilgrim's Progress, you're like making it closer with you're on this amazing journey
Yes,
with him.
that's a very good point. Actually, I like that. And as you say, it's ever moving onward. One line that stuck out to me was just very simply, "An open door is set before thee, and no man can shut it." And I like that idea of the open door, sort of on the periphery always, because they are. I think at certain points of the text, the story they're making their way toward the celestial gate, right at the end, which I guess is heaven or salvation, if you like. So there are always we probably should have said that is sort of the end game here, the
Right.
destination they're heading toward, and you get glimmers of it here and there from certain positions where they can sort of see the glowing light or whatever. And yeah, I suppose I like the idea that yes, as you say, you're on that path with them, journeying ever onward. Absolutely.
So some people would say that allegories get confusing.
Mm,
Tolkien hated when people called
yes.
Lord of the Rings allegorical. And
Hmm.
I think I read another thing by Bunyan that was a different type of allegory, which was all to do with a war, and there was a city, and
Oh,
the names of all the walls and all the soldiers and all of the commanders were allegorical in
interesting.
this in a similar way. And that one, I think, pushed it beyond the point of being helpful, where
Mm,
you were quite enjoying this fantasy story about trying to defend a fortress, but
yeah.
it no longer could really be. I could not unpick the allegory, and it wasn't helpful. Um,
That's interesting. I often wonder. I don't know, but I wonder off the top of my head if this is because of the vogue for cartography at the time. It's kind of peak fashion, and you're seeing all these beautiful astronomical maps come out, and there's a great sort of fashion for furnishing one's house with. Literally mapping the world around them. This is when obviously all the great sort of cartographers of England are flourishing. And I know that Milton, he sort of created his own universe. Obviously Dante had his realms, and you can see a infographic, if you like, of the various the very geography of the area. And yeah, that's quite interesting. I mean, it sounds like maybe he bit off more than he could chew with his. It's like sort of we try to build like a Sim City type. That's quite funny.
But
I
would you
like.
agree? Would you agree with me though that Pilgrim's Progress does a
Yes.
pretty good job of actually being helpful reframing of your life, as well as being a wonderful piece of literature?
I agree. It's something I would definitely encourage. I would want my children to read. And it's so inoffensive and harmless, but it's beautiful as well. And it just has all the. It reminds me of being really at school, when it was. Back in the days when you'd sort of sing the hymns in the morning in assembly, they'd give you a parable, and I still remember the little parables as an adult now, and it helps to think of okay points of where you need courage or whatever as being the hill to climb and the trek, and once you reach halfway yeah, I really do think it's a beautiful. It's a very. It's not the sexiest piece of literature, but I mean, it doesn't have to be. It's an uncompromisingly good Christian thesis, isn't it? In many ways, I think.
It's a family friendly. It's
I
kind of
mean,
a
it was always a staple in the household, and I don't think it's ever been out of print. Um, mhm.
yeah. I think it was at one point the second most printed religious work after the Bible.
Really interesting.
Absolutely massive.
That's
This is
very,
like,
very
you know,
interesting.
this is Avatar of its time,
Yes.
effectively.
Well, it's one of those books you will see a lot now in a very it was always very beautifully printed. You'll see it with gilding. At any old bookshop you go into, you'll often find a Pilgrim's Progress that's very, very beautifully or ornately decorated. So you can tell how popular it was.
Having compared it to Avatar, I now feel like the decline in our culture is very
Oh no,
apparent.
the hill of the miry swamp or the
Yes.
but
Now
back in the bog.
I'm gonna have to go and get myself out of the slough of despond, which I've
I
just
love I love that so
got
much.
myself
What's
in.
it? Something calls it something about scum and the scum and the mire or something. I did enjoy that. Yeah,
Let me see.
the scum and the filth.
Scum and
That's
the
it.
filth
It
that
is the
attend
descent with the
conviction for
scum and the
sin
filth.
doth continually run,
Oh,
and
I
therefore it is
love that.
called the slough of despond.
That is an epitaph to end all epitaph. That is
Yeah.
so beautiful. I'm going to have to get that printed out, and put it on my door.
But worth mentioning that I mean, just to once again show the richness of the allegory
Mm,
here and the points he's making, it's not just that he's despondent because, say, his cat got run over or something.
right.
Specifically, the reason he's despondent is because of his own conviction of sin. So, in a sense, he's got this book that he's read about, and you can imagine there's somebody who like, opens the Bible,
Mm,
reads about God, this holy, just being who will judge you for your sin, but has given you this way to the celestial city,
mm.
and you're like, right, great, I'm going to get there. Let's head off on this pilgrimage. But you find immediately that you're just confronted with your own like sinfulness and wickedness and
Very good
your
point.
inability to stop being like that.
Mm.
And that's why he's despondent, is like, I thought my life would change forever, but I wake up the next morning and I'm still the kind of sinful, dark individual that I always was, and I'm never going to make it to this celestial city.
Yeah, and it's not an easy thing to be told when you first meet the Bible, which is that you're sort of a chronic chronically bound to sin and the
Yes.
broken world, and I guess that's the idea of the city of destruction. I don't know I don't know if that's something that makes it sometimes easier for Christian nationalists to bear the kind of the broken world we live in, because it comes from the understanding that that is how it's sort of meant to be, if you like, or is going to be. But yeah, and that's, you're right, that's sort of him, that process of him taking it on and bearing it like Atlas, really, with the
Right.
burden on his back. Um,
Yeah, and
mm,
his companion who turned back pliable was like, he heard about this good, this book and the
yeah,
city, and was like, great, I'll come with you, Christian. And then he gets to the despond and immediately turns back, because
yeah.
that's
It's a
just
bit
his
nippy. I think I'll turn
personality.
back type thing, isn't it?
So every person that you encounter on this journey
Mhm.
is like somebody to check yourself against.
Yes,
You're not
yes.
being pliable. You're not being obstinate. You're not being
Mhm.
hypocritical. But brought so vividly to life. So
Yes, and yeah, as you say, completely charming. Charming is the word. It's lovely. I
yeah,
don't know if it's intended to be funny, but I found it humorous at points, because it's so charming. And yeah, I mean, how rare is that now? How wonderful.
yeah. And any last comments or anything that you'd want to point my audience towards?
Just again, thank you for having me, and just a reminder, if anyone's interested, that Lindisfarne, it's called Holy Island. I can maybe put a link below. I'm sure lots of people have heard of it,
Yeah.
but yeah, the Lindisfarne pilgrimage. And you don't have to go on the actual pilgrimage, but the walk across the sand dunes is where it typically is. And yeah, I
Perhaps
would
we'll have
encourage
to
people to do it. That'd be
organize
great.
a little pilgrimage with our community here.
Honestly, it'd be wonderful. Yeah, I think people, it'd be good fun.
Yeah,
You can
we
carry the
could read
cross
we
there. I
can
mean,
yeah read Pilgrim's Progress as we walk across.
you
Imagine
know what?
that.
That would be like actually the Canterbury Tales. On the
Yeah.
journey, they're reading stories to each other, and it starts and ends in the pub. So you can't say fairer than that. I think that'd be great fun.
Well, thank you very much for joining me for
Thank
Lamster,
you.
and
Thanks for
I'm going to
having me.
finish the stream by reading a couple of verses as we're making our pilgrimage, as it were, through the Passion narrative, and we're gonna live through this Easter week through the story of Easter. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests, the elders, and the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people.